We have a full program. This will help keep things moving as I introduce you. John Eccles, representing House District 90. Cindy Munson, representing House District 85. Tammy West from House District 84. Colin Walkie, representing House District 87. Kevin Calvey, completing service, representing House District 82. And representing the Senate, I know that Senator, I always confuse which I should call, Dr. Yen was here for a few moments, but he was going into surgery. He is not a surgeon, but an anesthesiologist. He could not be here for the remainder. But Stephanie Bice, Senator for District 22. Thank you all for being here. So on each table are cards for you to write down questions. If you just hold those up, members of the Government Affairs Committee will pick those up. We're going to please direct those not just to one person, but so any of them could answer. And also we're going to sort them so we don't get 15 in one category and others left out. So we will collect those and kind of identify those and hand those or read those here. If you've been around the metro area as long as I have, you already know her or know her voice. A member of the Oklahoma Broadcasting Hall of Fame, Billy's golden tones have been gracing Oklahoma airwaves for years. The Northwest Chamber should be proud to have her as a member with Cassidy Financial Group and as a board member for many years. Please help me welcome today's moderator, the hard-nosed journalist, but always charming, Billy Roadley.
Thank you, Jeff. Hard-nosed. My husband is here. He can tell you. I would like to point out my husband by marriage, Jim Palmer. We were co-anchors for many years on the radio. He's also with the Corporation Commission, so if you have any earthquake questions, see him. He's right over there. Thanks a lot. I'm honored again to do this, and really proud of our lawmakers for showing up. And I'm heartbroken that Senator Yen had to leave because he lost his primary race. And I think that might be a telling tale about this year's elections. There is apparently, as a journalist, I have to say apparently, an overwhelming sense of get them out of office. If you're in office, get them out of office. So thank you for being here and braving that situation. And I would wonder if you would address that case as well. I've been told that going door to door, one of the first things they ask you when you're a candidate is, are you in office now? Are you an incumbent? Have any of you found that to be the case?
Well, you mentioned allegedly, and I would say that in my case, being in office was not a hindrance, but I think a help. I won my primary election with 73% of the votes. So not looking for accolades. They're just, I think, to sort of counter the idea that vote everyone out, I think it's really a matter of, are you communicating with your constituents? Are you attending chamber events? Are you out in the community? Those are the things that are really important to people. And also, I think most of the folks on this panel are really good about responding to constituents, whether they are through email or phone calls or sometimes through Facebook or social media channels. There were questions about, are you an incumbent? Did you support a certain policy or measure? But I think for the most part, if you shoot straight with folks and tell them why, they're okay with it.
Okay. We already have some questions, but I want to open this on something that was just in the papers here lately. The State Ethics Commission, to whom you must report, is suing the legislature for a lack of funding. Now, we have people here on appropriations and budget, on both upper and lower houses. Can somebody tell me what happened with the funding for the Ethics Commission? Would you like to see the Committee on Oversight take that case and do away with the Ethics Commission?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that, so I'm going to unpack it all quickly. The Ethics Commission was constitutionally created by vote of the people, so there would be no methodology to get rid of the Ethics Commission. I think the current Ethics Commission we have does a great job. I've been a fan of the Ethics Commission and an outspoken praiser of the Ethics Commission. The old Ethics Commission, it was very difficult to get an answer out of them. You would call them up and say, I have this question, and they would say, well, maybe, but you can't hold me to it. Well, that's the worst answer of all answers. With this Ethics Commission, if you call them up, they will give you an answer. I do think, though, when you look at the Constitution, when the Ethics Commission was created, Oklahoma's a populous state. We had a concern over who was going to watch the watchdog. So constitutionally, the Ethics Commission is not allowed to have carryover funds. Those carryover funds pursuant to the Constitution go to the General Revenue Fund. Now, we've never done that. There's lots of constitutional mandates for one reason or another we haven't done, but that's one of them. So this year, the Ethics Commission received an additional $2 million in funding. I've texted my appropriations chair to get the exact amount if I get the percentage, but that money came from their carryover funds. So the lawsuit is essentially you can't fund us with our carryover funds, but it doesn't mention that constitutionally those carryover funds have to go into the General Revenue Fund. I think the lawsuit will be done away with very quickly. But that being said, I do want that to be clear. I think we have an excellent Ethics Commission that's doing a really, really good job and is actually enforcing the rules. As somebody who follows the rules, I'm very excited about that too. They are enforcing the rules. I disagree with the board's interpretation of this, and I think constitutionally I think most legal scholars are going to believe this is going to be a very short lawsuit.
Okay. Anybody else want to? No? Okay. Let's get into education, which I understand a few people are concerned about, like the ones who went on strike. And I'm going to specifically ask this question. We have a couple about tax increases and education. And if Tammy West is on the Committee for Appropriations and Budget for Education. Is that correct? And can you address why doesn't the legislature force education reform to save money before increasing taxes?
Well, we found ourselves in a very historically difficult situation. That being the pipeline for teachers has completely dried up. There's multiple reasons for that. Discipline in the classroom, which I'm doing an interim study on this summer. Career choices. Kids have a lot of different things they can do now. Education nationwide is not a choice that a lot of people are making. But then primarily, we had the lowest pay in the region. That is essential. We have overcrowded classrooms. There is no pipeline. We want to have lower classroom sizes. Well, you can't have 2 classrooms in a subject if you only can hire 1 teacher. So that was essential to get solved because we've got to be able to hire highly qualified educators to teach our children, not emergency certified people. And there's not always anything wrong with that, but already this year we have 800, and it's because the pipeline has dried up. Nationally, this is a problem, but in Oklahoma, it has become the bellwether for how we've operated for many years. Oklahoma, I'm kind of old. We have never, in my memory, been above 48th. And we're a 100-year-old state. We've never been number 25. We have always been at the bottom. And one of the key things we needed to do, we need to have highly educated people in the career. It has to be a career of choice. We are now second in the region. So that was something to stop the bleeding. You have to do something to put the finger in the dike. So that was one of the decisions that we made. We have done some things, though, with regards to reforms. There is consolidation taking place voluntarily. I actually traveled to Arkansas, which I think is the bellwether in Oklahoma for going in and consolidating schools. I met with the chief of staff who served under Governor Huckabee at the time they did consolidation. He said, don't do it the way we did it. Do it a piece at a time. That is what we have begun to do. We want voluntary consolidation. We want superintendent salaries to be in line with the job that they are doing. Actually got legislation that was signed by the governor this year that is required on school district and the State Department of Education website within one click, have a superintendent salary, benefit package, enrollment, test scores, the free and reduced lunch status, all of those things to be clearly visible, because information empowers the citizens. It empowers the voters to know what their district is doing in comparison to another district's. That, I think, is good reform to start with. We also, though, are doing performance audits, and I want to make sure we touch on this. The performance audits that we have put in place, and we're going to be starting, Representative Eccles may be able to roll them off the top of his head. We talk about audits. We need to go in now because we have turned the state's budget around. We did the teacher pay raise. We are funding things. We are not going to be running a hole in a deficit this next year. In 16 months, we did that. From a $600 million budget shortfall, we turned it around. But with that becomes, again, responsibility to make sure as we're reinvesting in the state, we're not just spending money. The performance audits are going to be key to that. The Department of Education is one of the places that will be audited to make sure that, as in business, we do performance audits. You don't want to just cut without knowing, do we need to cut? Do we need to invest? Do we need to streamline? Do we need to consolidate services? Do we need to blend things? That is the focus going forward. So with regards to education, I know I've answered that, but it is a many-sectored answer because it's a many-sectored problem. We had to stop the bleeding. We have to have educators in the classroom. We do need to make sure that we are streamlining, but we need to make sure we're doing it in a way that we're not duplicating what didn't work in other states, but that we're doing what has worked. And sometimes that's an inch at a time, but we're willing to do that. It will be slow going, but we're going to get it done.
All right. Representative Walke and Representative Calvi both serve on judiciary committees. I have a question about the people voted for judicial reform last fall, and it seems like we're having a hard time implementing these things and even maybe turning back on some of the things. Can either of you please address that issue?
When you're speaking of judicial reform, are you talking about criminal justice reform?
Criminal justice reform, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that there were initial steps to begin to chip away at criminal justice reform measures that were voted on by the people. And I think that was personally wrong. And I think that's part of the reason why you see such an outcry right now regarding State Question 788. Whether you supported State Question 788 or not, the question is it our jobs as legislators to say we know better than the people? And I think the response back to that is quite simply, no, we do not. The people are the ones that elect us into office, and the people are the ones that have the opportunities to vote on ballot measures. And in that particular case, those criminal justice reform measures should have been left alone, period. And there weren't major changes to them. I want to be clear about that, but I think that they should have been left alone the way that they were. And so I really think that it comes down to simply the people are upset about it, and understandably so. I voted in favor of both of the criminal justice reform measures, and I was not happy to have to battle out the issues about whether we ought to tweak what actually happened, because the people spoke and the people's voice ought to be listened to.
Well, that last statement I agree with wholeheartedly, and I did not support the marijuana measure, but I was very, very upset at the way the health department addressed it. And, that's one of the reasons why I typically don't vote to give more money to the bureaucracy, is because they do think they run the place, and they have, to be honest with you, for a long time. And we do need better oversight over all areas of state government. And even with this upcoming petition on, I don't want to get on the marijuana thing, but if they don't get on the November ballot, it should be scheduled for a special election shortly thereafter. Let the people vote, whether I agree with it or not. On the criminal justice reform side, this is an interesting occurrence, but after that election, there was a bill offered that was going to change just by statute, not a revote of the people, but it was going to change the statute to modify one of the things that the people had just voted on. It was something involving drugs near schools. Now, that's probably a fairly reasonable modification, but it was not being presented as let's let the people revote on this particular part. It was we're just going to change it. I voted no, and I had one of my constituents who voted no on the the ballot measures on criminal justice reform. But he emailed me and said, I didn't support those things, but look, the people voted, and let's not undo that. And I wholeheartedly concur with that. There is a lot more that needs to be done on criminal justice reform. That's actually one of the reasons why I'm now running for county commissioner, because a lot of that needs to happen at the local level with reform of bonding. We put too many people in jail for things like failure to appear in court on a darn traffic ticket. I'm sorry, that's a poor use of taxpayer resources. I'm very conservative. I'm a fiscal hawk. That's just not smart government to do things like that. And it ends up clogging up revocation dockets, et cetera. It ends up putting more people ultimately in prison, people losing their kids, losing their jobs, and having to go on welfare. There's a whole lot of things that happen because of, and it's not the fault of the police. They're just the messengers on this deal. It's the fault of greedy governments, oftentimes local municipal governments, who are just trying to gouge people for fines and fees and using jail as a means of debt collection. We need to stop that. Jail should be reserved for people who are dangerous. And there are, trust me, people who need to be in jail. I prosecuted terrorists for the Army in Iraq. I got 8 of them sentenced to death by hanging. I'm obviously tough on crime, but to put somebody in jail because they missed court date on a traffic ticket is asinine.
Okay, you also have gone to the local level, sort of. We have a couple of questions that I'm going to try to tie together. If somebody could name some things the state legislature can do to increase sales tax revenue for cities, be specific. And then another, I would like to see taxing services at last looked at. This would increase the revenues for the state. Working for a small business, this hurts. But even more importantly for cities, cities live basically entirely on sales tax. Do not take tax items such as doctors and other professional services, but items such as car washes, barber and beauty shops, auto repair, labor. This would tremendously increase tax revenue. Can we address tax revenue, Cindy or anybody, for cities, municipalities? Or is that strictly yeah?
Because I ran that. Well,
Stephanie was on the radio yesterday morning, by the way. She was really neat.
And my husband said he didn't recognize my voice, which kind of made me nervous that, he was listening and didn't recognize my voice. The one thing I think is important to talk about is the internet sales tax conversation. It's been going on for quite some time. And 2 years ago, I dipped my toe in the proverbial water to try to figure out how we could force online retailers to start collecting sales tax. And what I quickly learned was it's a federal issue. Because of a court case called Quill versus North Dakota that was decided in '96, unless you had a physical presence in the state, you could not collect online sales tax. Now, if you go back and think about in 1996, calculating sales tax for a state or city or municipality was incredibly cumbersome because it was all done manually. Fast forward 22 years, and that's a very different conversation. The good news is, several weeks ago, the Supreme Court heard another case, internet sales tax case, Quill versus South Dakota, and they actually ruled that states can, in fact, start collecting internet sales tax from these online retailers. We currently, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, I think we currently collect from 7 of the top 10 online retailers now. Wayfair, Overstock are a couple that we don't. We do, as of last year, have started collecting from Amazon. That was a voluntary offering from them, but they also knew they were going to build a distribution facility here, so it was kind of a easy one for them. But I think it's 70 of the top 100 we're collecting from. That collection is important because the impact to small businesses in your communities has been affected by the fact that I can go online and buy something a little cheaper and have it shipped to me for free rather than going to your store in Bethany and purchasing it. So those taxes are going to start being collected on the local level, which should benefit not only the state, but it'll benefit the municipalities and the counties around the state of Oklahoma. As far as looking at other taxes, whether we talk about services or otherwise, I think it will be a conversation. I'm not sure how in-depth it will be because that's a very tricky road to follow, path to follow. But I do think that we should have a conversation around digital goods. it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that I can go to Barnes and Noble and buy a book, physical book, and pay sales tax on it. But if I download that book on my iPhone from an online retailer, I don't have to pay sales tax on it. So I think the digital goods conversation is one that we probably will be taking a look at.
All right. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Just make a comment. I think it's pretty well known that we are operating from a model that's basically from the 1930s with how we fund our state. I think all of us, bipartisan on this panel, recognize that going forward with a vision for the state of Oklahoma, we have got to start digging in and changing that. We cannot, what's the definition of an insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And until we go in and fundamentally get everything back up to speed, which is not a 1930 model in 2018, we're going to continue to have to be looking for, maybe we can do this and maybe we can do that. And I will tell you right off the bat, we made some really hard votes the past couple of years, harder votes than I ever thought I would be asked to make as a freshman legislator. That will be some hard votes. But sometimes you have to rip the Band-Aid off and you have to solve the problem. And I honestly feel like that's kind of the place that we're at. We've got to fix the core issue, not just try to look at what we can do on the surface to keep limping along.
Okay. Cindy Munson, I think this is under your wheelhouse. Someone asked, with Alzheimer's statistics on the rise, what is the state's plan to partner with the health department to create a daycare program for folks that do not have the funds or assets for assisted living or home care services? Can the state get into that? Human services, child welfare, and all that kind of?
Before I get to the question, where's my friend that thought I was Stephanie Bice? Is she still here? This is Stephanie. I'm Cindy. Oh, it's funny that we were sitting next to each other. But it's such an honor to be called Stephanie Bice. Yes, I work a lot on issues pertaining to Alzheimer's, specifically in Oklahoma. And I'm on the state planning committee. And we are getting ready to start the plan for 2019. And so we will be looking at sort of what our priorities will be for this upcoming year. Some of the things that I have worked on in regards to the health department is to improve care for those who provide services, whether that's an in-home health care or in a nursing home or independent living home with someone who's helping a loved one with Alzheimer's or dementia. One thing we know is we don't have a cure for Alzheimer's at this point, and so anything we can do to improve services is really key, and that's what I try and work on. Because that's kind of, we don't have a lot of money to be investing in some other places, but Alzheimer's is something that's really important because the number of Oklahomans is increasing who are diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's as well. In terms of the question was providing funding. That's probably an area that we can look at and improve. I don't even actually know what we provide currently. I know that Medicaid dollars are used for Alzheimer's, people who have Alzheimer's, and so we can look into that. Who had the question? I'd like to know who it is. Okay, so I can connect with you and we can work together and I can bring that up to the state planning committee. But right now, most of the focus has been on improving care and increasing quality currently, and having the health department be sort of the oversight for continuing education and quality care for the services that are provided in the nursing homes and different facilities.
All right. Coming up in October, we're going to be seeing wine and stuff in grocery stores. I think this is my question. Okay. Actually, they wrote down Stephanie Bice and John Eccles. Are we still on track for October? Are there any other changes?
I am excited for October 1 for a variety of reasons. This has been a culmination of 4 years of work in trying to get our alcohol laws modernized. So I'm thrilled for what's to come. There's a lot of exciting things that are happening. There are some things that will still need to be tweaked. And I jokingly told the ladies at my table, Brianna Bailey, who used to write for the Oklahoman, Because I had been so intimately involved in alcohol modernization, she dubbed me Our Lady of Perpetual Liquor Law Reform. And as a Catholic, I was pretty proud that I have a saint name. So, yes, there will continue to be changes. One of the changes that will take place, and if Representative Calvi is fortunate enough to be Commissioner Calvi, he will be tasked with calling potentially for a vote of the people in the county of Oklahoma to allow for liquor stores to be open on Sundays. We passed that as a county option. It was not part of the original legislation. We'll also look at whether or not to allow minors in stores. So there are some things that will continue to evolve over time, but I think this is a really exciting step for the state. And I'll just add, I've talked a lot about it lately because we're coming up on the October 1 date. This was never about alcohol. It was always about economic development and consumer choice. And I think that you're seeing the economic development transpire with the announcement last week that Coop L Works bought the Armory and is spending $20 million to renovate that building. You've seen breweries pop up across the state. You've seen wineries in rural communities expand. And that's jobs and that's tax base. And so I think that it's going to be an exciting several months to follow after the October 1 launch.
All right. Anybody else? Very good. Okay, we're going to get to, I tried to avoid marijuana because we'll be here all day. Could you please explain the logic behind not having a special session for the marijuana vote, Mr. Majority Leader? It seems it was a political decision as much as one to let the legislature have a break
Of health.
for campaigning.
So I tried to be quiet because I figure we're going to talk a little bit about marijuana. I'd answer some of those questions. So first off, you got to go through the timeline. So when 788 passed, the people decided it was the Department of Health that was in charge of the implementation of 788. To have a special session directly after the passing of 788, there was bipartisan uniformity that was not a good idea. It would have literally gone to what Representative Walkie and Representative Calvary were talking about, against the direct will of the people. It said, let the Department of Health do it. Now, let's move forward a little bit. Then the Department of Health did it, and boy, did they do it. And they had two problems. One was process, and the other was policy. There was process problems in the Department of Health. When you have two last-minute amendments, and by the way, I'm going to talk about the Board of Health as compared to the Department of Health. The Department of Health is filled with great, hardworking Oklahomans that do an excellent job. And the Board of Health is too, but they really messed this up. And when the Board of Health heard two last-minute amendments without public comment, without any form of transparency, that were in clear violation of 788, in addition to, frankly, I thought there's about 20 things. I have a list that I think the Department of Health, the Board of Health did that's in clear violation of 788, but those two just were the icing on the cake. And then there was the explosion that happened after that. So I think asking now we're at where we're at today with the bipartisan, bicameral committee that I'm here to co-chair at 2 o'clock today, that will be meeting every Wednesday, taking live testimony, figuring out what we're going to do. So then the question becomes, what do we do now? If the question is special session or no special session, it's really the wrong question. The question is, what do we do? I mean, what's the process? Having the legislature run in a special session without a plan might be the worst idea yet. I mean, the concept that what we're going to do is just going to run in, we're going to have no idea what's going to happen, and we're just going to hash it out on the floor, that's more talking at the people and not listening to the people. What we do in the legislature when we get in that process is that's us taking control. What we're doing with this bicameral, bipartisan group that, like I said, is senators, representatives, Democrats, Republicans, we're going to be meeting open meetings every Wednesday starting today, where we're going to be listening to the people and trying to figure out an agreed bill. And as the co-chair of that committee, not just as floor leader, it's kind of cool. It's the first time I've ever been a committee chair. But as the co-chair of that committee, we're not coming out with recommendations that aren't bicameral and bipartisan. Now, when we come out with those recommendations, one of two things is going to happen. We are going to tell Department of Health and save the citizens of the state of Oklahoma about $500,000 and not having a special session. We're going to tell the Department of Health, you do this. And if you don't do this, we're going to do it to you. Or if it needs to be a special session, if that agreement needs to be, then I'm going to speak well of every member of this panel. I know there isn't one up here that wouldn't be glad to go in and do their job. I mean, everyone in here would rush to that. So I think what you're seeing from the legislature right now, and I was talking to my friend Lawrence before we came in, you actually have the opportunity as the legislature to rebuild a little bit of public trust, some of which has been lost. To slow down and be the adults in the room and show that there's going to be an open process where the citizens are listened to. The worst thing that would happen is running in without a plan.
I have a question. Is this going to be available on the internet? It's in 535 at 2 o'clock. I looked that up. But it's also going to be streamed?
That's right. It's going to be live streamed. I bet it will be live streamed. If I was guessing, it'll be live streamed on all 4 major networks, Facebook pages. We're going to live stream it. I've made arrangements for an overflow room. So in addition to 535, which is the large Senate conference room, there is another large House conference room on 5. So we're going to have that live streamed there. The whole state is going to be able to watch this. They're going to be able to watch as we go through this process. And again, it's going to be a lot of listening. Now I want to tell you, the wheels of the legislature move slow, and they move slow on purpose, by the way. I was reminded of the words of the Apostle Paul. For me, all things are permissible, but not all things are profitable. You can do whatever it is you want to do until the legislature tells you you can't. That's what we do. We take away a little bit of your freedom. And on purpose, the American system moves slowly because it should move slowly. That gets very frustrating when you just want it to move fast. So how does something move fast? 10 people go into a back room and cut a deal and come out and tell everybody what they're going to do. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a bad idea. We are going to have an open and transparent process, and we are going to be able to work together. And I believe, I've personally spoke with all 3 House Democrats, personally spoke with all the 5 other House Republicans. These are people that want to work together, and we're going to do the will of the people in 788.
What does this have to do with August 1st, the Board of Health doing a reconsideration of the rules that they messed up?
I have publicly called, now I am not speaking on behalf of the committee, but I'm allowed to have my own opinion too. So I have publicly called on behalf of me, which I hope becomes a committee recommendation. The state attorney general has came out with, I want to say, 7 recommendations that he believes the Board of Health, I keep saying department, the Board of Health overstepped their legal boundaries outside of 788. 788 is the law. Whether or not they're relitigating 788, it's pointless. It's the law. I have called on the Board of Health, and I'll do it again here. They need to implement that letter. An awful lot would be done to restore the public trust. That doesn't need a special session. They can just change those rules. Those are rules like the 12% limitation on THC, the last 2-minute rules. There's another rule in there that nobody's talking about, but they're about to. It requires every female of childbearing age to pay for a pregnancy test prior to getting a medical marijuana card. That is pejorative, it is sexist, and it is insulting, and it needs to stop. I mean, that we can't do that. And those are the types of things that they need to go in and fix. And this, for me, is not about where you were on 788, if you were against 788 or against. This goes to the core of our representative democracy. This goes to the core. The people have decided this is what they wanted. And I think you will see, despite all of the hits, and I could fill this room with all the beefs I have with the legislature, and I'm in the legislature. I think we all could. But at the end of the day, I think you're going to see a bipartisan committee that will implement the people's will the way they voted for it. And I think that now that won't happen in a day. Don't expect me to have a bill that everybody's agreed on by, today at 5:30 when we're done. But do expect open and transparent and honest communication. And I hope you're going to see members act in a way that we haven't seen them act lately, which is to work together.
Okay, and also the petitions going for recreational marijuana, probably going to have enough signatures, probably in time, but the wheels of government grind slowly, and it's being said that there's no way it's going to end up, pardon me, on the November ballot. So are you just twisting it? Kevin Calvey's dying to die. Are you just twisting in the wind with all this time being spent on medicinal marijuana now when the vote, well, are you relieved the vote probably won't happen in November?
Well, first of all, I think if they get the signatures, I do think probably because of the state constitutional timeline for initiative petitions, things like that, it probably is too late to get it on the November ballot. In fact, I can't think of another state question that would have gotten on the ballot quite so quickly. We have to obey federal laws involving military voting, for instance, and things like that. I do think, though, that if they get the signatures to do that, I'm generally not for a special session, but if that doesn't get on the November ballot, and I don't think it would, the next opportunity for it to be on the ballot, there's only two other options per state constitution. One would be to wait until the next general election 2 years later. I suspect all those people that signed the petition are really not going to be very happy about that. So I would support actually doing a special session to call for a special election in December, January, February, somewhere in that time frame, much sooner than the 2-year delay that would otherwise occur. It requires a 2/3 vote of each house of the legislature. That was done back in 2001 on the right to work question. That's exactly what happened there. It got on the special election ballot, even though it was a constitutional amendment. We should do that in order to allow a quicker vote on it, whichever way you look on it. I don't think, however, that means the discussion that's going on now is fruitless. I think it will probably explore certain things. I know a number of employers, the state chamber and other chambers and all that, are concerned about how does this impact an employer's ability to deal with their employees who are using marijuana. That's a very fair question. I think even some of the proponents of marijuana legalization, or at least the question that did pass, the medicinal one, recognize and have stated publicly that they actually expected the legislature to come in and deal with some of these tangential issues on it. So I think that there are fruitful issues that need to be looked at, but I do think that because our state constitution says a constitutional amendment can only happen on a general election ballot, I think we should look at scheduling a special election much sooner than November of 2020 on that issue.
Has any legislator that you're aware of, or any department or board of health person, gone to another state like Colorado to look at their system?
I will jump in and say that yes, there are many that I'm familiar with, and in the House of Representatives, J.P. Jordan, and I know Senator Yen did a lot of work on the Senate side, but there in the House of Representatives, we passed overwhelmingly a bill that was drafted by Representative J.P. Jordan that checked off a lot of the boxes that we're talking about needing to be checked off, and it's already done, and I think it's sitting in the Senate. But the House did do months' worth of work to get to that point, to pass that legislation. It went through committee, a lot of discussion, so that was done. And I'm going to segue here just real quick because I think it's important for you guys to know. With regards to the live streaming, I'm not sure where it's going to be on TV, but you can watch it on the internet at oksenate.gov and okhouse.gov. Easy way to watch it live.
Of course, many of us go back to work and we aren't supposed to be doing that. But whatever.
But a lot of you do. I've seen the comments.
Okay. Do we have time? How much time do we have? We're still good. Okay. Is everybody kind of... yes, Ray? No? Okay. Everybody kind of okay on the marijuana issue now? Because we have some other questions. Will we be compliant with the Real ID Act before we have to use a passport to fly or get into a federal building?
Yes. You want more? I passed that bill 2 years ago. We have a full. Yeah, we're fully compliant. You have nothing to worry about. There's no. There are 2 states in the union. I remember when I was before this group 2 years ago, I said, we really need to pass this bill. I'm going to do it next year. We're going to get it done. But don't worry, it will never happen that any state will not be able to get on a plane as a result of not being Real ID compliant. And then I did what I said I was going to do, which is went and we passed the bill. We are fully Real ID compliant. There are 2 more states that are not even trying to be Real ID compliant. And by the way, they're always going to be able to use their passports. One of them's Missouri. If you think the federal government is going to not allow a swing state to get on planes with their IDs, I just don't believe it. And I still don't believe it. Now, that being said, we needed to be Real ID compliant. We are fully Real ID compliant. You will be able to get your Real ID compliant licenses in approximately 2 years. It's a long process. And if you don't want to get your Real ID compliant license, we've got a non-Real ID compliant license for you. So we have a 2-tiered system, as which most states did. Now, I will tell you, when every state becomes Real ID compliant and every citizen has an option, then there is a chance the federal government might enforce their threat that they've. The federal government was like a mom and dad that made a threat that was too big. So they think they've looked back and like, oh man, we can't do that. Like that'd be crazy. And but there was some real problems. Some of you called me. You couldn't use your IDs until we did this to get into nuclear facilities. Doesn't affect Oklahoma. Military bases does. That's a big deal. I mean, we had a bunch of vendors that were calling me saying, because that's where it did have an issue. They couldn't deliver goods to the commissary unless they happened to have a reservist or a former military member that still had a Real ID compliant military ID. So that became a real issue in Oklahoma, which has fully been fixed, and now you can use them for all things.
Okay. Representative Calvi can escort all of us onto any military. That's right. And Jim, we're good to go to fly out tomorrow morning. We're leaving. I would like to, each of you, if you wouldn't mind, to take a few minutes to look back on the last session and look forward to the next session, or in Representative Calvi's case, a whole change in venue for you, possibly.
Yeah, I'm tempted to say see ya, suckers, but it was not a pleasant experience. Special sessions, as a rule, unless they're very focused and tight, and you can, kind of get in and get out. But special sessions where you don't have a plan ahead of time are just a horrible idea. And I think that more than anything has undermined public confidence in state government. Get your work done on time. Again, something like this marijuana thing coming up where you need to schedule a special session, or if there's some particular thing that causes a need for that, but you can work it out ahead of time, and then you just have to be in the minimum number of days. That's happened many, many times and didn't create an uproar. This last one, I think that the session was called not by anybody in this room or anybody in the legislature. Okay, it's the governor that calls a special session without any plan, and I think that did more to undermine faith of the public in state government than anything. That's my observation. I've been through many special sessions over the years. So it has been an exhausting time. Many legislators, especially those of us, who still have kids at home and things like that, the salary of the legislature is difficult for. I mean, I've got 6 kids, so so it's difficult. So you rely on that other time to do your day job, which is what legislators are supposed to be. In Oklahoma, in most states, you're citizen legislators. You're not supposed to have that as your career or full-time job, and for most, it is not. There may be some single people in the legislature for that's their main deal, but you don't really want to have full-time politicians. You want people who actually have to go and live under the laws that they have made, business owners and things like that. So as a result, that has been a very difficult year, I think, for many in the legislature. I think it's why so many people chose not to run for re-election. And so I would hope that in the future that things would not be done that would lead to any unnecessary special sessions like that, and that they would be resolved more quickly. So again, that is no flies on anybody that's in the legislature. That was the governor's call. But I thought that was an enormous, staggering mistake, the way it was done, and I would hope that would be avoided in the future. So I'm looking forward to working in county government, where I get to work with Commissioner Mon and many others, and I think it'll be more efficient. Thanks.
And I want to interject. I did a disservice, I think, to Senator Yen. He lost in the primary, not just because he was an incumbent, but his opponent really hammered on the immunization case. So I want to make that clear.
So looking back to last session and what's going forward to next session, the one thing that I would say to everyone here today is to give you all some hope about a proper functioning government. because myself, Tammy West, even Representative Munson, we've included her. We've started a freshman bipartisan caucus of Democrats and Republicans, because when we were elected into office in 2016, the trend towards anti-incumbency and just frustration with the governmental process in general was coming to fruition. And so we got elected not to be Democrats, not to be Republicans, but to get stuff done. My best friend in the State House of Representatives is a Republican from rural Oklahoma, okay? And we couldn't, yeah, well, we couldn't be more different. And I say that even, against other people in my caucus. But the reality is that we recognize that if we have conversations and civility with one another, we can actually accomplish things. And so I'm very hopeful and optimistic that going forward over the next 2 years, we're going to bring the incoming freshmen in under our wings and show them that you do not have to be enemies. In fact, you can be coworkers and you can disagree on certain issues. But no matter what, you have to go back and you have to do your job for the betterment of everyone in your district. And I can tell you now, not everyone in my district, not even everyone in my house is a Democrat. All right? So I'm very hopeful for the future because of that.
Well, I'm hopeful also. And with regards, I'll comment on this. I know I went into the freshman caucus, is what we call it, that meeting, our first one, and it was a little bit tense. I mean, we aired a lot of grievances, but I walked out of the room, and in my mind, I've not forgotten the thought I had when I walked out the door. This is not about compromise. I would ask no one to compromise their beliefs or their principles, but it is about finding areas of collaboration. And I learned that there is a big difference between compromise and collaboration. And on the doorstep, I shared this at the lunch table. I remember telling people, because I was on the school board for a number of years for Putnam City Schools, I wanted to get ROTC in our schools. I thought, well, I'm going to go in and I'm going to suggest this, and we're going to get that done. 2 years later, ROTC. It's a process. I knew it was going to be an inch at a time, and I thought, boy, isn't that a great tagline? I know it's going to be an inch at a time, and I believe that. Now I say, I did not realize you were going to have to fight so hard for every inch. It is hard work. But I think that we're at a crossroads this election cycle. I am hopeful. We have the opportunity to reinvest in our state. It's very important that we go forward with a real attitude of fiscal responsibility. And I don't say that we've not been in the past. But when you have money, it's almost as dangerous as if you don't have money. We truly, and that's why I'm excited about the performance audits, and I brought them up. We have to go forward reinvesting, not just spending money. And if we can reinvest in our core services, put the money where it's the essentials, not the non-essentials, and elect people who know the difference between an essential and a non-essential, reinvest, get the state moving forward. I am extremely optimistic, but to do that, we've got to have people in positions of influence that are problem solvers and who understand the difference between policy and politics. And I do think that there is a core group that made that distinction between policy, politics, and collaboration, and I'm very hopeful going forward also. I think the state moving forward, we've laid a great foundation moving forward to make Oklahoma something better so that we don't ever revisit the 100-year cycles that we've revisited.
I think looking back over the last 2 years, and the freshman class, by the way, is going to get some credit for a lot of these accomplishments. We did it in a very disjointed way. There's a reason I talked with the Board of Health about policy and process. Our policy was good. Our process was bad. I want to read you off some things that the legislature has done in the last 2 years. House Bill 1010, teacher pay increases moving from 50th, 49th in the nation, depending upon who you ask, to second in the region, only behind Texas. For the agency audits, I love it when the governors kept talking about they're going to audit every agency. We did that 2 years ago. It's already started. It's funded. We've started. The four different agencies are being audited right now. I wish some of them would have known that, but that's already happened. Real ID compliance, a long overdue state employee pay raise, support staff pay increases, the largest education budget in the history of the state of Oklahoma, the largest one-year increase in the state education budget in the history of the state of Oklahoma, agency reform, doing things like, well, last session we got rid of the Board of Health. It's going to go away in January, and it's going to go to a gubernatorial appointment. On top of that, how many of you know that Oklahoma City last month had its lowest unemployment rate since 2015? You ready for this one? Except for one weird month in 26 October, we had a really low rate in the state of Oklahoma. Except for 1 month, last month, the unemployment rate in the state of Oklahoma was the lowest it's been since 2008. Decade unemployment, and an unemployment low. And the largest revenues that we've had in the history of the state prior to, by the way, House Bill 1010 coming into effect. It was probably the most productive legislative session, not probably, it's by far the most productive legislative session in recent memory. So what was the problem? The problem was process. The problem was we were in the middle of changing the way people think and changing the way people work together. And I'm going to give a plug for this committee that I'm going to leave here and go to it too. We're going to see whether or not we've turned a corner, because we have an opportunity to show process. We have an opportunity to show that instead of grinding people down into submission, which is a lot of what the floor leader does, I kind of beat you down till you agree to vote for good policy. I'd prefer to have to do a lot less of that and a lot more of people like Colin Walkie and Tammy West and Cindy Munson on the House side who are very quick to compromise and vote for good policy. And that's my hope for the future. My hope for the future is that we can build on some real successes that we've had last session that really moved the state forward. But we are going to build those because I think members have learned that we're only going to succeed or fail together. The House can't succeed and the Senate fail. The legislature can't succeed and the governor fail. The Senate can't succeed and the House and governor fail. As we learned that, which I think we've learned over these last 2 years, because we trust things happen enough succeeding on our own. That's not going to work. And I do believe we've turned that corner. I believe this freshman class deserves a lot of the credit for what they went through and to help make those things happen. And I think the citizenry has told us that they're looking a lot more to just R&D, and they're looking at people that are wanting to solve problems. And that's what I'm excited to next year. And I think we're going to start that today, and we're going to see if it's Senate and House bickering or if it's partisan bickering. I'm just telling you, Stephanie's great on that, by the way. But you're the lone senator. If it's that bickering, if it's House Republican and Democrat bickering, and I got to tell you, I think the citizenry is ready to turn on those that do that. So I hope what you're going to see is a microcosm of 1 year ago. I would not have stood before this group as confident. I told you 2 years ago we're going to pass Real ID, and we went and did it. 1 year ago, I wouldn't have sat in front of this group and said, we're going to come up with a bipartisan compromise that everybody's going to sign off on 788. Now I think we can do it. That's the difference in the legislature, and I think big things can still happen.
The last 2 years. They feel like they've flown by. Just to let you know about the freshman caucus, I think that Representative West and Walkie really do like me. But if you don't remember, I was elected in a special election. So my first year was kind of like a trial year. I call it my trial year. And so I will technically, should I go all the way, I will retire with Representative Walkie and Representative West. So I'm technically a freshman. Being able to join that group was really, because one, I had an identity crisis on where I belong, but also to walk into a meeting and to look at people across the aisle and know that we can work together, know that we really like each other. Working at the Capitol is a very interesting workplace. It's pretty eye-opening when you enter that feeling of, I think the natural assumption is that you're supposed to hate each other and everyone's evil who doesn't think like you. And that is just not in my nature. I'm always looking at ways to work with people, and I always try to find the person I least agree with to see where our commonalities lie. And so I too am very excited about moving forward, I think, with this next upcoming election, because you have so many people who are retiring or not coming back to the legislature or term limited. there's going to be a whole new crop of members and people who are coming fresh off of the campaign trail. And I think one of the nice things about coming out of a campaign and going into session is having this perspective that your constituents have, and remembering them telling you that they don't want to see the bickering and they don't want you to be super partisan, but they want you to be working together and to find solutions. And so I think we'll have somewhat of a refresh because of the turnover, and that's very exciting. I will say, in the midst of all the chaos of the last 2 years, the silver lining was the level of advocacy that increased among Oklahomans across the state, not only with the teacher walkout, but also with the Mental Health Advocacy Day that happened in the fall that a lot of people happen to forget, or I think we have had so much going on that we don't know where that Advocacy Day was placed in our memory, but that was one of the most meaningful experiences so far of my legislative career, because I heard from individuals who typically don't come to the Capitol or don't feel like their voices are heard or that they even have a voice. And I had grown men stand in front of me, trembling, shaking, holding papers to tell me their story. I am now, then I was 32, but I'm now 33. I am a 33-year-old woman, and they were afraid to come and talk to me. And that increased my compassion for all people in our state, but also helped me to realize how important it is as an elected official to be out in the community and to be on the ground. That's more important than sitting in our not-so-fancy offices at the Capitol and being on the floor, but actually being out and hearing stories. And it should never be their first time that they interact with an elected official. But that day was incredibly meaningful for me. The walkout was, too, whether you agreed with it or not. The energy in the building was incredible to see Oklahomans talk and care about and learn the process of what was going on, and no better group of people than teachers who took notes, diligent notes every day, and reported back, and they were early and on time, and for many of them to come and ask basic questions of the democratic process in voting, but also what happens in the legislature. So few people know the details of what we're doing, so it's hard to keep up. And I had the chance to visit with my first grade teacher, my third grade teacher, my fourth grade teacher, my high school government advisor, and my eighth grade geometry teacher. And it was no coincidence that all of those teachers have shaped my life. And so I left the Capitol pretty weary and tired. I'm still pretty tired, and working on taking care of myself. But that is my focus going into 2019, is to take care of me so that I can take care of all of you and do my work well. And I think many of those days were so chaotic and stressful that the bickering back and forth and the fighting that you were seeing amongst us was just a natural reaction to stress and uncertainty and a lack of balance in our own lives. But I think this election cycle, we will have hopefully some more balance, not to have you lose any members over there, but I think balanced government is always good, and when you have more people at the table with a diversity of thought and experience, things will be better, and that's truly my passion in the legislature. And I'm very excited about more women coming into the legislature. I know we have a few candidates here who are running for office. I think there's so much opportunity for women to work together and to bring their ideas, and it's exciting to see them run for office, and my hope is to really mentor them and guide them through the process as they come in to the legislature. And one note I wanted to make, I'm sure you saw in the news, we lost a member last week, and so I just want to memorialize and remember Representative Claudia Griffith, who was a good friend and mentor to me, and the loss of her life has really opened my eyes to what is most important, and fighting each other really isn't the most important thing. Finding a way to love each other and to really hear each other out on the issues that are important to us and find common ground and some kind of compromise, but to make sure we get back to our families and our friends and our communities and to ourselves, to take care of ourselves. And that's who Representative Griffith was, and she was a great mentor to me, and I hope to carry that into 2019.
As the sole member of the upper chamber, I get to speak last. I think the last 2 years have been challenging, to say the least. I don't know that anyone at this table ever expected to serve 4 sessions in a year, in an 18-month period. It's unprecedented. It was incredibly challenging, especially for those, as Representative Calvi said, who had careers outside of of that building, it made it very difficult to juggle a family, a career, and the legislature with all of the frustrations that were going on at 2300. But some great things came out of it. Representative Munson mentioned the, I think, insight that many of the teachers and educators and parents actually got from the walkout was incredible. They are now willing to call or email my office to ask questions. I see them at events, and they're very open and honest about their thoughts and ideas, as am I. And I think that that's the biggest takeaway for me from the teacher walkout was we built a relationship with each other. We are not individuals that are working at 2300 that are, on a hilltop. We're just people that decided to put our name on a ballot and wanted to do the best we could for the state of Oklahoma. And I think people saw that and recognized that. One of the challenges that we face, and I look at this from my marketing background, is that we've done a really poor job collectively as a legislative body and even the executive branch of messaging. We haven't explained ourselves very well, and I think that's a frustration. I'll give you a great example. In August of 16, after we had made significant cuts to the budget because of revenue failures, there was an article printed in the Oklahoman that said the legislature fines $140 million. It was as if I had stuck $140 million under my desk and someone miraculously stumbled upon it. The reality was we cut too much. We weren't sure what revenue we were going to have. Oil and gas prices had continued to fall, and we had excess revenue that we were able to actually give back to agencies. But we weren't telling our story. Everyone else was telling the story for us. And we have to do a better job of telling the story of what's really going on so that we can build public confidence, so that people understand the process. I've heard over and over the last week and a half, the legislature, thwarted the will of the people with 788. We had nothing to do with that. That was all the Board of Health. So I think educating the public, telling our story, making sure that we're getting our message out there is really important. Along with that is transparency. You've heard audits quite a bit throughout this afternoon. We need to be able to publish that information in a way that's accessible to everyone in this room, that you all can understand what those numbers are showing and be able to say, hey, you know what? Maybe this agency does need some more revenue. Maybe we should put some more focus on this particular program. I think knowledge is power. We talked about the teachers that took notes. I think I became one of the educators because I would make handouts and give them copies of budgets so that they could understand that $2.45 billion of a $6.9 billion budget was going to common education. I wanted them to have the knowledge and power to be able to understand the process. And then the last thing I want to just touch on that I think is good for the public to think about is the term limit conversation. In the Senate in 2016, we had 15 new members elected to the state Senate out of 48. In 2018, we will have at least 10 new members. That is more than half of the Oklahoma State Senate will have less than 2 years experience. When you're talking about long-term vision and planning and revising tax code and some really big, heavy lifts, it's hard to do those things when you're constantly having to re-educate new members on what you've done in the past and what you plan on doing in the future and get them on board. The House is in the same predicament. I believe it's 2/3 of the House will have less than 2 years experience. That's challenging. And when you're in an environment, as you mentioned earlier, the vote them out mentality, in some cases you're doing yourself as an Oklahoman a huge disservice by voting people out because that experience that person has is walking out with them. So something to keep in mind. Thank you all very much for the opportunity for me to be here with you today.